We've got some fantastic numbers that have joined us. Lots of people joining us here this morning on Zoom. Welcome, everybody. Today, we're having a fantastic talk by a lovely lady who is a colleague and a friend. So I'm really honored to have the privilege of welcoming our speaker this morning. But before we get into that, just a little bit of housekeeping rules. To all participants, please ensure that your mic is on mute so that we don't have any interference with background noise. You will see on the mic section on your Zoom, it gives you an option to mute your mic. So please go ahead and do that and mute the mic. Also, we will be taking questions and answers after the talk. So brace yourself for that. I think the talk is going to be fantastic. So if you've got any burning questions that you'd like to pose, please feel free to put them on the Q&A section of your Zoom platform. Put all those questions. We will note all those questions. And towards the end of the talk, we'll make sure that we bring them live to Alice so that she can answer some of your questions, the questions that you might have. For those that will be joining us on social media pages as well, please feel free to post your questions and comments on Facebook as well, so that we can also share those inputs in. And as for us, I think that's just pretty much it about the housekeeping rules that we've got this morning. We'd like to welcome each and every one of you this morning. This is us embracing the new normal. With COVID-19, we're trusting that each and everyone is safe at home and that we will soon be sitting together and enjoying the live talks as we used to. But for now, let's enjoy what we've got. And I think this is fantastic because it brings us together from the comforts of our homes and from all over the world. Now, without any waste of time, I have the honor and pleasure and privilege today to welcome Alice Naughton. She is the Environmental Interpretation Officer at Kirstenbosch National Botanical Garden. She is both a horticulturist and a botanist and has worked at Kirstenbosch for the past 29 years. Her job is to communicate the scientific concepts and information behind the garden to visitors by translating the complexities and jargon of the natural sciences into simple and easily understood language, and to present it on the storyboards and posters that you find at Kirstenbosch. In the course of her work, she has become an enthusiastic photographer, taking beautiful pictures, and has developed and built up a large library of images, some of which she will be sharing with us today. In fact, today, Alice will be taking us through the beauty, diversity, and magnificence of Kirstenbosch in spring, enjoying the landscape, the plants, flowers, birds, bees, and the butterflies, conveying the joy and peace and excitement that Kirstenbosch bestows. Ladies and gentlemen, without any waste of time, thank you so much for joining us this wonderful morning. And without any waste of time, Alice, over to you.
Thanks, John. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. Let's get going.
Yeah.
So, John, that thing across the front, is that not showing? The thing on top, right? Okay. So, as John said, I will be going through Kirstenbosch in the springtime, which Kirstenbosch is beautiful at any time of the year. But in springtime, it really just is beyond beautiful. And everywhere you look, there are flowers. And always, ever since the beginning of the garden, Kirstenbosch has been very famous and well visited during the spring months, but particularly for the display of spring flowering annuals, which in the very early days of the garden, back in the 20s was when it started. And of course, there was a lot of empty space, and while they were still developing the garden, and they got into the habit of sowing annuals there to fill up the color. and give a little bit of something to see. And large areas of the garden were filled with in this way, and it would draw many, many visitors. In fact, spring was the season for Kirstenbosch. And this picture here I found in one of the old Botanical Society journals, which is now Felton Flora, taken by the then director, Professor Compton, in 1925. You don't really get a feeling of the color so much, but he did say in his caption, and that was the white Damorphotheca pluvialis. And growing the annuals in this particular part of the garden, which we now call the annual beds, continues to this day. Every year, it is very much a feature of the garden, and it still draws flocks and flocks of visitors. The Damorphotheca pluvialis is very beautiful. And of course, is indigenous to the peninsula as well. Also known as the rain daisy. So this picture was undated, but it's probably in the 60s. I'm not very good at judging the fashion of the day, but in the annual reports, they would always mention how many thousands of visitors visited during spring, and the traffic jams that they caused along Rhodes Drive, and the parking lot was full, and they had to close the gates, and it was quite chaotic from all accounts. And I think we've only matched that in recent times with our concerts. But that is pretty much the same view today. And looking, well, not today. This year, of course, we didn't have much of a display. So that was 3 years ago. But there is something quite uplifting and exciting about the moving, rippling variation in the color. It really is quite, it's indescribable really, but well worth a visit. And that's later in the season, looking back much the same way. And then this is in the 50s, which we dated fairly clearly because Mr. Winter, our former curator, he told me that they removed that path, which at the time I couldn't really understand why, because I think it's quite a nice little path. But anyway, they took it out in the early 50s. And that's much the same view today. Well, 3 years ago. Thanks, John. And that is the Yersinia calenduliflora, which really en masse is almost too orange to photograph. I find it very difficult to photograph. It's just too orange, too much. But as I said, this year, thanks to the lockdown, which was in autumn, which is our planting season for the annuals, we have no annuals this year, which is rather a sad, forlorn sight when it normally looks like that. So that is last year's display. So we have to have the memory of last year to carry us through to next year. But it was very unfortunate. They literally closed the garden as we were beginning our autumn work. We hadn't even had time to clear the beds, to be honest, just put the new ones in. That was last year. And this again is what happened this year. This in particular, that little section was one of the only bits where the annuals seeded themselves. So we had the white Damorphotheca and some of the Octotus, and some of the Yersinia came a bit later. But that again is last year. So you can sort of see more or less where last year's were. But they recovered a little bit this year, but not quite as good as they would have been with our assistance. So that again is last year with the Octotus hirsuta, the hairy Octotus, or Namaqua marigold. Beautiful blue daisies, that Felicia heterophylla. And that's also a Damorphotheca pluvialis, but it has a purple ring. So we call it the purple center. That's more from Posberg, I think. And this was a new one that Roger brought in, called the Coast Senecio. Also, it's quite a little dinky, sort of 20 centimeter tall, maybe a little bit taller. Nice clean yellow. And the beautiful Saldana Felicia really is quite remarkable. And then this is the little geranium incarnum, which also is a beautiful and well-performing little annual, but it's actually a perennial, but we sort of treat it more like an annual or biennial. And it seeds itself very freely. And what's beautiful about it as well, it gets a lovely range of colors. They start out quite lilac and end up almost purple. And the beautiful Heliophilus too, which en masse don't photograph so well because they're so fragile, gracile, but they are very beautiful up close, and the bees, of course, do love them. And then we have continued the tradition of the early days, and there are other parts of the garden which we also plant up with annuals. This is what we call the copy path, the copy being the one on the right. Also very beautiful, and I particularly love that view through to the Atlas cedar in the background. And that is, of course, there's the wild cineraria, Senecio elegans, which also comes in a white. And that's the view from the front with the Acinia anthomoides, which again, I like the calenduliflora very much, but this is, to me, a bit more beautiful because it has a variation in color. You get the deep oranges as well as the biscuit colors and the yellows, all in one, whereas the calenduliflora is really unremittingly orange. And we wouldn't visit Kirstenbosch in spring without having a look at the pfeffies, or I don't know what they're, midday flowers. At Kirstenbosch we do try to bring in the other colors, but this one, the Lampranthus aminus, see there, we do try. We have got a couple of the other ones, but we are a very wet garden. In winter, if you've ever visited Kirstenbosch in winter, you will know that we are very wet. And a lot of the pfeffies come from the Karoo or the West Coast, and they do not like being so wet all during the winter, so wet and cold. So we lose a lot of them during the winter months. So it's a constant battle to keep the other ones going. But this one, the one from Darling, loves it at Kirstenbosch. So it kind of tends to stay and take over. That's the red one from the Worcester-Robertson area, Speciosum. And that's one of my favorites, is the two-color, Chrysanthemum bicolor. Really is just beautiful. It sort of glows from the center. It really is quite lovely, but we have to plant it constantly to keep it going. And then that was a view in the afternoon, which is a challenge because you're looking into the sun and it does white out the sky a bit. But I do love the backlighting and the shadows. And the other part of spring that I enjoy is when you look across the top of the garden and you see all the changing in the colors of the tree canopies. And the oaks are always pretty obvious. They start out that brilliant green and then go into that jewel green, sort of emerald green. But that reddish, coppery color, if you investigate that and see what tree that is, it is the Scotia brachypetala. And it's not the flowers that you're seeing, it's the new foliage, which is also, it is just a beautiful color. And that it starts out that yellowy, coppery gold and turns into that brilliant green and then matures into quite a dark green. But the thing with the Scotias is that they're not reliably flowering. For example, that previous picture was a really good year. I think it was 2015. And then the next year, there'll be nothing. And then the next year, there'll be maybe three branches might have a few flowers. But you can't really bank on the Scotia to be flowering at Kirstenbosch. And I haven't yet figured out what it is that makes them flower or makes them not flower. Because even in the dry years, they might flower prolifically. And then the next year, they'll do nothing. But when they do flower, they are a treat because they just attract any bird, every bird, bees, everything is just buzzing around the tree. It's really, and they really are beautiful when they're in flower. And that's, of course, the oaks. One of the few left. This is what we still call the Oak Avenue or the Akalan, although there is but one oak left. But back in the 20s, it was an oak-lined avenue. And we sort of lose one oak or two every year. But joining in this beautiful display of spring foliage, on the left is the one of the Dombeas, Dombea tiliaceae, and on the right is the beautiful Celtis africana, which is one of our few indigenous deciduous, and also in flower at the time. Lovely, fresh, beautiful green. Short-lived. And then the other canopy that I always look out for is the red canopy of the erythrina. And in the arboretum, we have some really beautiful old specimens planted in the 30s. This one is Erythrina lysostemon, which is very red. Ours are all exceedingly red. And they also attract insects and birds and sunbirds and things, but my zoom is not good enough to catch them. And that's looking back up towards the arboretum. And those are Erythrina caphras with the lysostemon on the right and the worm slung, which obligingly takes you over the top of the Erythrina caphras. And as I said, Kirstenbosch is quite cold. So the erythrina, particularly the caphra, doesn't perform as well as it would in a warmer spot. In fact, in Cape Town, if you just head a few kilometers out towards the flats, like somewhere like Plumstead or Wynberg, you'll see beautiful, full flowering specimens. And the best I've ever seen are on, I think, where the old prison was, which is now the archives. If they're still there, beautiful, amazingly big. And when they flower, they're just the whole canopy. So ours, I always feel a little sorry for them. They're a little bit cold, and so they don't perform quite so well, and their shape isn't quite so beautiful. But they do very well for all of that. And also the canopy gives you the tree canopy walkway gives you a lovely bird's eye view of them. And you can see that they are quite different to the erythrina lysostemon. They're much more, they're sort of fringed and broad and tend to be more orange. And we also have another erythrina, which comes all the way from Ethiopia, and which intrigued me greatly at first because they look so very different to ours. But that frilly top of the flower is actually the calyx, which has these little, I don't know what you call them, lobes, I suppose, at the tip of the calyx as it drops, and then the regular pea flower comes out. And the reason we have the Erythrina abyssinica in the garden is because for a long time it was thought to be the same as Erythrina latissima, which we also have up on the concert lawn. They're the two stumpy ones on the right. And they usually flower towards more like early summer, but occasionally they will start in spring if it's been a warm, like this year they are. July was very warm, so it kind of gives them a boost. But they tend to start when the lysostemon is finished, as you can see there. And they are also, to me, one of the most spectacular. And similar to the abyssinica, they have those thread-like lobes on the calyx. And they also attract the birds and the bees. And they have these very large, like 30 centimeter long, very thick, papery leaves, very different to their cousins. And as you saw in that previous picture, it's also one of my personal favorites. It's a beautiful, what I still think of as Scylla, but it's had a name changed to Mawilla, the blue squill, with their lovely plumy, give that lovely filmy effect. Gorgeous things. But they do like summer rainfall, so they're not so good in a water-wise winter rainfall garden. And spring at Kirstenbosch also happens in the shade. So if you visit the Arboretum, you'll find clivias. If you go to the Dell, you'll see beautiful clivias. And of course, that little bit of shade between the main lawn and the peninsula lawn, full of clivias. And the Camphor Avenue. They are beautiful, also unbelievably beautiful. And we have a particularly beautiful cultivar that I think that I forget its name, I apologize. I have to ask Graham. But they really are just ridiculously beautiful. But for me, also being a former Gautenger, the fynbos is what is just amazing at this time of the year. If you go up along the fynbos walk and through the Protea garden, there's just so much going on. And you have the added dimension of the birds and things that come and join the party. Wherever you look, every direction, there's something going on in the spring. These, of course, are the pincushions and the Phylica. And mix your colors however you like. It all just looks perfect. As I always used to think of these sort of colors as the Bollywood colors. because my first Bollywood movie was my first introduction to joining colors joyously that we tend to be too nervous to do, but they just work. And this is my collection of, on the yellow pincushion. If you find a bed like this, position yourself and wait, and birds will come. It's just beautiful. So this is my series of, this one particular one is Leucadendrons Caudifolium yellow bird. So this is my yellow bird and the birds collection. So that's the malachite, beautiful bird. But I find him quite, what is the word? Challenging. I don't know whether I should take it personally, but I have waited a long time and very rarely catch them. But I caught him that day. I love the little orange-breasteds. They are just too cute. And sometimes they can make themselves look incredibly tiny in the earlier morning when they're all puffed up. This one looks quite tall and elegant. Sugarbirds, love them too. They can be quite bossy and aggressive. I've had a few fly at me if they feel I'm encroaching a little bit, but not so much in Kirstenbosch, more on the outskirts. And the double-collared sunbirds, that's the southern or the lesser. Of course, they are the most easy because they really don't give a damn. They're very, very bold. And sometimes you get unexpected visitors, like little white eyes that just you're not expecting to see. But I presume they're after the insects. The others are all after the nectar. Anyway, back to the flowers. This was just a beautiful combination of the lovely feathery Phyllica, and that is the bud of the scarlet ribbon pincushion, which is a hybrid between glabrum and totem. And that's how it opens. You always don't think of Protease as hairy, but they are very hairy beasties. And that's, of course, backlit. That's one of its parents. That's Leucadendrons glabrum. Its other parent is totem. And I must say that for me, totem is more of an early summer pincushion. It always seems to be later in the season. So I kind of left him out of this one. More Bollywood colors. That's Leucadendrons vestitum and the beautiful Silago, which this particular one, Silago canescens, it only flowers in August and bit into September. And the rest of the year, it does nothing. They have developed, well, Adam has developed another one called Purple Turtle, which gives you more color throughout the season. It doesn't have these beautiful, tall, plumy spikes. And the beautiful rocket pincushion. The yellow is particularly lovely to me. And that's Formosum, one of the ones that do that lovely opening up into a Catherine wheel. That's the orange flame, Erubescence, also flowers pretty much through into early summer. Caudifolium, which comes in many different colors. That's the pale orange, there's a dark orange, there's a red, there's a yellow. Birds love them to bits. And this is a very dinky one. It's about the size of I don't know what that would be, a golf ball. And it has the added advantage of not minding a bit of alkalinity if you have soil that is not perfectly acid. And then other Protease, you like the mimetes and the orange breast that came to visit. Buchus, they really also start in the winter. So I think of them also as winter spring is when the buchus come into their own. And you get the added advantage of the fragrance of their leaves, the aroma. But particularly the ovata, the bees are just, if you're bee phobic and it's a sunny day, it makes my heart beat a little faster, having been chased by bees a few times. But the bees adore them. And this lovely little pelargonium, which flowers now, but it also flowers in summer if it gets irrigation. So they're quite tough little things. Other buchus like the adenandra. This one is also a nice one because it's a bit more forgiving of your soil coming from, I've grown it on areas where it doesn't have to be acidic. It can be acid to neutral to slightly alkaline. And then I do love the leucadendrons. I often think they get overlooked. I'll probably get quite boring on this topic, but you get the pincushions where you get that amazing color, but it's only in August, September, October, and then it's finished for the rest of the year. With the leucadendrons, you'll get, they spread, they give you interest throughout the year. This is their flowering time in spring, some of them, like the discolor one. But you also get their new growth in summer, and then you'll get slightly different change of color in autumn. So they give you sort of a more extended, as a garden plant, I think they're pretty marvelous. The discolor gets very tall, so it's best for the back of the bed. And that again is quite a sharp contrast of colors. That's the xanthoconus with the male on the right and the female on the left, with the red concussion in between, the Caudifolium, and various other fernbos. Nice mixed planting. That's a close-up of the flower head of the male, of the xanthoconus, which is a peninsula one. Quite easy to grow, but it does need acid soil, really. And then there are many, many leucadendrons. I love them for their star-like inflorescences. I think they're very beautiful. All very weird. This one matures in the summertime. It has these beautiful cherry red cones, which are also attractive. And that's the male of the same species, but you can quite understand why in the early days some botanists put them in different species, because they really don't look like they're related at all. And what would be spring without some of the sweet pea bush, which also has the added advantage of beautiful fragrance. And they really are also attracting bees, and carpenter bees mainly, and little bees. Oops, sorry. So then carrying along the fernbos walk, it's another view of the Protease garden. And what I love also is the silver of the trees and the silver of the rocks on those beautiful, cool, early spring mornings. It's just quite special. Just don't know when to stop sometimes. And that is the male flower of the silver tree. The females are harder to find. You tend to flower higher up. I should have included one, I forgot. But the male is definitely a more showy plant. Beautiful. I love the way Kirstenbosch, wherever you look, there's something to see. Down, looking into the bottom of the garden there. And that is the Grayley fountain concussion. And it's one of those, if you look at I've got the 3 stages of the flower head. So when it starts, if you were to do a slow motion capture of the flower as it ages, you will notice that the styles actually turn almost like 360 degrees. So they start, they point up, outward, and then end up pointing up. They're very strange. But if you had a time-lapse photography, it would show. There's more views of the garden. And my favorite views. Just invites you in. Nice example of a mixed planting with the pinks and the silvers. And that again is the Acmedinia mundiana, which is more tolerant of less, you can plant it in your garden if your soil is not 100% acidic. If you've got a bit of alkaline coming in, and the Helichrysum petiolare really, it's quite difficult not to grow. It tends to take over. King Protea, we have it planted in various areas. That's forming a nice little mixed planting with the Melianthus and the Silago. Really are very lovely. The king. And that is actually the new growth, even though it mimics a flower. And we get many a query of what flower is that, with quite a few of the Proteas. They have this weird habit of putting, I think the anthocyanins that turn it red are like sunscreen for them. That is, even though it looks tough and hard, it's a very delicate new growth. And the lovely Silago, it really is very beautiful. And that's the leaf of a up and coming Sutherlandia. And the Melianthus, which are very big and take up quite a lot of space for a lot of our tiny little gardens of today. And they have that quite nutty flavor, and if they are toxic, if one ingests them, so they can be a little bit nerve-wracking kind of plant. But they produce copious amounts of nectar and attract birds and insects of all shapes and sizes. That is a Cape bulbul, demonstrating pollination. Very cute. I always love the way they always look so surprised with their big eyes. And more views. This is the Fynbos garden with beautiful perennial daisies. Because that was another thing I remember from my early days at Kirstenbosch, is that before the annuals have got going, if you come up into the Protea garden, you'll find these masses of these amazing perennial daisies, putting on every bit as good as a show as the annuals. That is, just phenomenal. That's the Arctotus to Caudifolium, which is an added advantage of being a good ground cover and water-wise. More Salago. It's brief but glorious flowering in spring. And this is one of my favorites. It's the Dimorphotheca cuneata, which is a perennial. Although it's maybe more treated in the garden, more like a biennial, 2-3 years maybe max. But they are just amazing, beautiful. And they also come in an orange. But we have this sort of creamy white and a lovely white and an orange. The orange has not really got en masse yet. Really, really lovely. And then this is it gets quite tall, this one. It also starts in the winter, ends off in the spring. This is the Euryopsis abrotanifolius. Very, very yellow and lovely, and also very easy to grow. And then its cousin from further up the coast, Euryopsis virgineus, which self-seeds a bit like a weed, so be warned. And more proteas. That's a lovely another mixed planting. That's the Protea eximia. So all in all, I would highly recommend, even though we don't have our annual display this year, to come and have a walk along our Fynbos walk, because truly the lockdown had no effect whatsoever on the Protea garden or the clivias. They are both performing exceedingly well and as per normal this year. So I would strongly invite you to come and see for yourself and take a walk along the Fynbos walk. And that's it, I'm afraid. Seems to have gone through very fast. John? All finished. So thanks very much for joining us. Are there any questions, John? John?
Hi, Alice. Belinda here. There are some questions. One of them you touched on, and it's please advise how you survived lockdown, what you could and could not do, and hopefully a not to be repeated experience.
Well, for lockdown, the only staff members that were allowed to stay were the people that lived on site. So that was about 5 people, a curator, a estate manager, and about 3 horticulturists, and I think 1 or 2 related staff, but actual garden staff were about 5 of them. So they really just concentrated on the things like watering in the glass houses and the nursery. And the garden was pretty much left to its own devices. And I think they did the mowing as much as they could. They tried to keep the lawns in check. But really, we had to abandon the garden, and all of us were sent home. So things like the annuals were just left. And the horts that were on staff, the handful, literally skeleton staff, concentrated on keeping the collections alive. But the garden was left to its own devices.
I've got another question. Oh,
yeah.
Sorry. I've got another question from Charles Sturton. Given that the legumes are one of the largest plant groups in the Cape, why are there so few in cultivation generally?
It is something we've also discussed at times, and we do discuss having a legume hort because what we have horts that focus on a collection rather than that also have a section. But we have tried in the past to get them in. We've tried with hypocalyptus, and the podalurias, they seed themselves quite happily in the garden, so we don't have to try very hard with them. And we got the Liparia as well. But I think in general, they are quite difficult in cultivation. They don't do cuttings very easily. So I think they're quite a tricky group. But I'm not quite, it's not that we shun them or anything. But I know with the hypocalyptus, Anthony worked very hard to get them in the garden. But we get them and we sow them and we get them in the garden, and then we have them looking nice for about a season, and then they're gone. And they don't self-seed. And so, yeah, but and I don't know if we've tried other Liparias, but we have the Liparia splendens. And the other problem in our garden is we have quite a lot of Phytophthora is endemic in the garden. So we have a high turnover of species. We've got and the cultivation practices also seem to make plants less long-lived than they are in the natural environment, with all the scoffling and the watering and the weeding and stuff. So we lose a lot of plants. So it's a constant battle to keep the beds full, actually. But the legumes do seem to be a little bit more tricky than the others, which is saying a lot when we also deal with proteas and things. But yeah.
We've got another question here. Tell us about the soil and climate varieties that allow for such a plant variety in Kirstenbosch.
Well, Kirstenbosch, we're a little bit of an anomaly, because in terms of fynbos, where a lot of the fynbos is top of the mountain, and fynbos is very fussy about soil. In fact, so we are where we are in the garden is mostly on granite soil derived from granite. So we are quite heavy, clayey kind of soil. So in truth, we struggle to grow a lot of the mountain fynbos, which doesn't like the heavy soils. And we struggle to grow a lot of the Cape Flats fynbos. So we've had to adapt and find spots in the garden where they will survive. So with things like I said, with the feiches, that like a drier environment, they do struggle at Kirstenbosch. And if you've ever been here in winter, you will understand, because where often Kirstenbosch seems to get double the rain that happens anywhere else. We in the lee of the high point of us and Newlands have the highest rainfall, and even in a year like this year is kind of like, even in the dry years we still wetter than everybody else. But I mean, during the drought years we weren't quite as wet. But there are times where, as well, where Skeleton Gorge comes down, there's a natural seep that follows that line. In fact, there are two also down Nursery. And if you walk across anywhere, like along the sculpture path, in a wet year, you can sink right down almost to your ankle bone. It gets so wet and soggy. And not many plants like that. So we tend to be, that's why the fynbos you'll find us on the back half of the garden, which is open and sunny and better drained, than in the lower part, which is more of a swamp, in all honesty. So in the early years, what they did is they trenched and did French drains to drain that water so that we could actually garden there. So Kirstenbosch is actually not ideal for fynbos, ironically, and certainly not ideal for succulents, where the glass house that we built is to display succulents that cannot survive outside of Kirstenbosch. So you'll find that things like Aloidendron dichotoma, the quiver tree from the west coast, from Kamiskruin, they will rot outside. And we've tried many times to grow them outside, and they just die in the winter. So that's what the glasshouse is for. It's really just a huge roof to keep them dry. So we kind of grow what survives. And that is also good advice for a gardener. Don't toil along trying to grow something that, rather work with your natural environment and grow things that like where you are. But sometimes we have to grow other things to show the collections and things. But the plants that cannot survive in the garden, we will have in a potted collection in the collections nursery, in large tubs and things. Keep them safe from the Phytophthora and the rain. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, following on from that, there's another question that says, please can you share fertilizing secrets and other gardening tips?
Oh, well, with fynbos, we don't fertilize. Fynbos doesn't like manure, so we really only mulch. Or if we do fertilize, we will use very low dose, and we will use, if it's not something organic, or seaweed fertilizer, or a chicken manure fertilizer, or you get the slow release fertilizer, but always in lower doses. Protease and most fynbos, you see the soil that they are naturally adapted to is exceedingly poor, nutrient poor soil, and often very, very sandy, almost like pure sand, especially the high mountain species. So they are not like normal plants, and if you put them in rich, well-watered, heavy, soggy soil, they will die almost instantly. So you need to get a nice, well-drained, acidic, sort of on the acidic side of neutral, and well-rotted compost. And don't dig it in, lie it on as a mulch. So when you're planting them, create your bed, mix in a bit of organic matter like well-rotted compost into a, if you don't find a fynbos mix in your local nursery, then buy something like the azalea mix and a bag of river sand and mix them until it's a nice, sort of almost like 50-50. And plant them in that, settle it, let water it in, make sure it's all well draining, and then plant your plant in that. And then when you're feeding, just give it a blanket of compost twice a year or once a year. Because of course autumn is the growing season, so usually we start in sort of late summer, March, April is gardening time in the winter rainfall area. So we put on your blanket of mulch. Try and keep scuffling and digging around to a minimum, because they have exceedingly sensitive roots. And if you have Phytophthora in your soil and there's a break in the plant's root, it could get infected, and then that also is death to them. So the best advice for growing Proteaceae is find a well-drained, breezy, sunny area of your garden, plant them and leave them. Don't dig around them as little as possible. Just leave them, plant them, and also the other thing is Proteaceae like water, but they don't like water to hang around. So water them, but make sure that it doesn't, that it seeps but runs off. You don't want standing soggy soil. In fact, where you have a dead one, you can almost be sure, if it's not Phytophthora, that it's poor drainage. But and also don't over-fertilize. I can't stress that enough. They really, in terms of comparing them to a regular plant, is that where if you overfeed a regular plant, they burn, whereas the fynbos will burn 10 times quicker than a regular plant. They just have such sensitive roots that it's like you're just giving them too much that they can't cope with at a much earlier phase than a regular plant would, than a non-fynbos plant. So underfeed rather than overfeed. Give them little bits more frequently than a lot at one time. Okay.
From Ronnie Glass, we've got, how did the garden survive without attention? It's forced neglect, not obvious today. The staff must have worked very hard, appreciate it. And then there's a follow-on question saying, do you bring in soil from their natural areas to assist different plants?
Well, to go back to the garden thing, we did find the weeds to take over a little bit, but we are busy catching up and getting the lawns back in shape. But the garden actually weathered it. I think it was fine without us, to be honest. And whether we bring in soil, yes, we do. If you visit our glass house, you will see that Ernst, he brought in that lovely red, rich soil in the Welwitschia house that was brought in from probably Van Reinsdorp area, which is the right kind of soil for succulents. So yes, we do bring in soil, particularly in the glass house. We haven't done it so much in the Protea garden, though we have considered it, but I think it would be quite a massive undertaking to do it in the garden area. So we tend to work with what we've got. But we do bring in soil for the nursery, which is, we bring in a loamy soil for the nursery. And we make our own fynbos mix. But for the garden, we haven't actually done it as a garden bed, no. But we do for the nursery side, bring in soil.
From Tanya Hushkovsky, absolutely wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. Very homesick for Kirstenbosch, staying in Johannesburg. Would you be able to talk about the bark stripping happening on trees? I heard a little bit about it.
Well, it is something that we just deal with. It happens. And we get attacked every now and again, but we have a very active security force who generally chase them away, and we've arrested a few, but it's just an ongoing problem. But it's not so prevalent that you would see it in the garden. I think the trees that we find get attacked are the camphor trees, which are on the border of the garden. You do see them being attacked fairly frequently. And in the parts of the forest, they will go for ocotea, but often it's the camphors they seem to take. But I don't know much about that, but I can ask our security man to give a report. I'm sure he would be happy to, but I know it is something that we do keep a regular eye on. And I think where we have security, we probably keep them out more than, say, somewhere like Cecilia Forest or Newlands Forest. So it is a problem, but not a major problem for us.
And our last question before I hand over to John, from Jamie Lee Pretorius. Have you noticed anything different with regards to pollination, pollinator agents, plants, before and after you came back to the garden?
I can't say about the pollination, but when we first came back and the garden was, when we first came back to work, some of us were allowed back that had to be here, that couldn't work from home. And the public, so the garden was still closed to the public. We were, in the early stages of the lockdown. And the garden was empty, and it was a very weird experience to be the only person in the garden. And I must say that for me, my perception was that the birds were more skittish than they had been before. Because normally, when you walk through the protea garden, you sometimes have to kind of like, you're walking among the francolins and the guinea fowls. Whereas when I got back and I was walking along, I noticed them shrieking and running away from me again, which was something I hadn't really noticed for many, many years. And also, I must say, when I was trying to take pictures of the sunbirds, they did seem a little bit more shy than they had been before. But I think that has worn off fairly fast. But in terms of what the garden, I don't think the garden suffered over much. It's just that we weren't there to take out the dead plants. So there was, and also the molehills on the lawns were quite remarkable because we smoothed them out. So that's one thing that I noticed a lot, were many more molehills all over the lawns. They were really very happy without us. But the birds were abundant, and they stuck around. So I think it was just literally, but I don't know if there's any more in terms of seed set. I would expect there would be. They would have been undisturbed. Certainly the clivia season, there were a lot of seeds on the clivia this year, but I don't know if that was a function of lockdown or not. But yeah, it was, that's what I noticed. But I can't say much. I don't know about the seed set this year. We'll have to wait and see. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thanks everyone.
Awesome.
Here's John.
Hello, everybody. I think we can all say that this was one of the most fascinating talks that we've had so far. We have some wonderful comments that have been coming up. We've got Debbie Bodley, who says, please keep the online talks going for all of us far away from Cape Town, and we dream of visiting Kirstenbosch. So these virtual talks are working fantastically. Martin Clark saying, thank you, Alice, for the lovely talk. It made me a bit homesick, seeing all the wonderful flowers and trees. I do miss the proteas, daisies, the feiries. Looking forward to the next talk. We've got Judith saying, thumbs up. Great and inspiring talk. We've got Jenny Jenny de Clark saying, thank you, Alice. Awesome photos and lots of information. So, you know, this is something that is, you know, it's, you know, everybody's just loving the talk. So thank you so much to Alice. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll see that in front of your screen on the presentation, we've got beautiful books that we've got. And some of those books will obviously feature some of the beautiful photos that Alice spoke to us about. They are available at the Kirstenbosch bookshop. So please come through. We've got lots of stock. Come and get yourself a copy. This is something really nice to keep on your dining room table, and something that you can share with friends. And actually, with the festive season coming up, this could be a wonderful gift to some of your family members. Ladies and gentlemen, without any waste of time, the Kirstenbosch Wednesday Talks are proudly brought to you by Room to Grow Gardens, Landscaping, and Struik Nature. We are absolutely privileged to have partners such as Struik Nature and Room to Grow, partnering with Sandy Kirstenbosch to bring to you all these wonderful talks. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, on the 21st of October, please stay safe. Remember to sanitize, remember to keep your mask on, and please stay safe, and we look forward to welcoming you guys again in our next talk. Without any waste of time, thank you very much. Alice, thank you so much. You've been awesome, awesome, awesome. Thank you for a great talk. Go and like our Facebook pages, Struik Nature as well as Kirstenbosch. Belinda, over and out. Thank you very much, everybody. Cheers and have a good day.